If you have a marriage interview coming up, I'm sure you've heard about the Adjustment of Status memo that went out, I think it was May 21st. I decided to wait before I put up a video about it simply because I wanted to give people advice about what's really happening. Not what USCIS says has to happen, because they're incorrect about that, but how are the adjudicators at immigration actually handling this memo? First of all, you have to remember the memo was sent out to adjudicators, right? It's to give them guidance as to how they should be handling these marriage interviews. And it basically said you have to remember that adjustment of status is discretionary, and it should be considered extraordinary relief, because what people should be doing is consular processing. Well, this immediately becomes a problem because there was a law that was passed a number of years ago now that said if you've been here illegally for more than 6 months and you leave the country, you're not allowed back for at least 3 years. And if you've been here illegally for more than a year and you leave the country, you can't come back for 10 years. There is a waiver for that, but the waiver is very difficult to get. So, USCIS suddenly coming out and saying, everybody should leave. Everybody should leave. That's just not going to happen for multiple reasons. First of all, adjustment of status is in the statute. USCIS just can't come right out and say, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. They're going to end up having a lot of mandamus petitions being filed. I just did a video about that. I'll link it at the end so that you can review it. What is a mandamus? Another reason why this is not going to work as well as they expect it to work, and that's because adjudicators have a fair amount of freedom make decisions on their cases. Some of the new people, they need to have a supervisor approve the decision, but I know there's a lot of old school adjudicators that don't like this heavy-handedness where the government is putting its thumb on the scale and saying, you have to deny these cases. We want to see denials. We want to see denials. And a lot of times after they get denied, then what happens? They get put in deport. And once they're put in deport, the judge has the right to decide their adjustment of status case, assuming that the I-130 was approved. What I'm going to do with this video is to give you the actual questions that are being asked. A lot of lawyers are sharing in other lawyer groups through ALA, through groups that we're in different social media things, what questions are actually being asked. So I'm going to give you these questions and I want you to practice them. There are some questions you should always practice. I did this for so many years and people just did not come prepared even when I had prepped them. So we're going to go through that, and let's do that right now. So some of the questions that they have always asked, almost always when I went to adjustment interviews, which I went to hundreds and hundreds of them, was, how did you two meet? You should know the answer to that. I mean, it's easy. Unless it's a bogus marriage, you should know the answer and be honest. And don't listen to notarios, friends, relatives, people who they did this themselves. Don't listen to people that say, well, you don't want to say that you work together, because if you work together, that's going to look kind of fishy, right? Or you don't want to say you were working together because you weren't supposed to be working, so don't say that. Just be honest, okay? You have to understand that the government knows more about you today than in any other time of our country's history. They can get your Social Security records. They know where you've been working. They can check your phone. They're going to check your social media. And they're going to check the same information for the U.S. citizen. It's not just for the immigrant. So don't lie about stuff. You're not allowed to lie anyway. You're under oath. So and the other thing about lying is if you don't lie, you don't need a good memory. If you're going to lie about shit, you're going to have to remember everything. Don't lie, okay? Very foolish. As I said, the number one question almost always is, so how did you two meet? Then they want to know who went to the wedding. They will take a look at your photographs from the wedding and things like that, but generally in the interview they're going to ask you, well, who went? And what they're interested in is, did your parents go? Did the U.S. citizens' parents go? Did any siblings show up? And maybe family in the foreign country were able to at least, I don't know if attend is the right word, but at least be able to see the marriage ceremony through Zoom or something, right? So they want to know what family members attended, basically what family members knew about it. I had a couple where he was Middle Eastern, and she looked like she was right off the main line of Philadelphia. You know, old blue blood with she was a beautiful young woman, blonde hair, blue, absolutely gorgeous. Her father was a surgeon, and they didn't tell the parents, her parents, that they had gotten married, because the father would have blown a gasket. So they didn't tell him. But you know what this freaking adjudicator did after they left that interview? The kids, because they're not dumb, they weren't that young, they were early 20s, they drove immediately back to her parents' house, knowing that both of her mother and her father were at work. They drive back to the house. This adjudicator had called the parents' phone number and left a message on the message machine saying that he was Officer so-and-so from USCIS, and he wanted to ask them some questions about the marriage of his daughter to Mr. So-and-so from Egypt. I mean, I was aghast when I heard that. He threatened to do that. He was talking about doing that in the interview, which was like, I thought he was just trying to get him super nervous, which he did. But they thought he might actually do it. I thought, he's not going to do that. But he did. So they went in and erased the message. And this is before Trump, right? And the law hasn't changed, okay? The whole purpose of that interview is to make sure that this is a valid marriage, that you didn't get married for immigration purposes, that you are living together, that you're commingling your money. So you need to still bring the same evidence as before. You need to show you have joint bank accounts. You need to show that your taxes have been filed together, that you have joint leases, maybe joint credit cards. Maybe you have a life insurance policy where the other person is the beneficiary. Show that you have been commingling money, that you're building a life together, that travel, that's always been good. When I was practicing, I didn't want to see photographs of a couple sitting in a restaurant. If there's a whole group of people sitting at a restaurant where they are also in attendance because it's grandma's 100th birthday, great. Pictures of the two of them in front of a Christmas tree, great. Photographs of the couple at a barbecue, photographs down the shore to show that you've traveled, maybe photographs from Disney World, Orlando, in front of the Statue of Liberty up in New York, wherever you are. Maybe you went to some place that's very, very well known, very famous, and you took pictures, or you had somebody take a picture of the two of you together. That kind of stuff is still quite valid, okay? Don't rely just on photographs, however. And the core questions aren't necessarily different. However, they are asking new questions, and I want to go through them right now. I'm going to have to read some of them, okay, because I don't have them off the top of my head. And the reason that I'm giving you these questions, as I mentioned earlier, is so that you can practice them. Don't just read them and say, oh, okay, we have to think about that. No, you have to sit at the kitchen table and practice them, okay? And frankly, if you have an attorney, I did this all the time. I would bring the couple in a week or two before the interview, and I would act as the adjudicator, and I would ask them these types of questions. It's important for you to actually go through these questions with your partner. One of the new questions that they're asking is, well, why are you filing for adjustment of status instead of consular processing? Why don't you go home? Well, there's some very valid reasons for that. Each case is going to be different. I mean, one of the answers for that is something that I just told you in the very beginning. Because if you leave the country, then you're going to need a waiver to get back in. Or you don't have the money to go home. You know, I'm not going to put words into your mouth as to why you're not going home to do this, but there's some obvious logical reasons. Why did you file for adjustment of status? I didn't want to separate from my spouse. Maybe she's expecting. Maybe they're just afraid that they would be separated for a long period of time. Or maybe they don't qualify for the waiver that they need to get back in. But that's one of the new questions that they're asking. Additional questions, and just so that you realize, these are questions that were actually asked at adjustment interviews, the marriage interviews. Why did you overstay your visa? See, that's another question that never changes. You know, when you came to this country, what was your intent? They're going to ask about the initial visa that you entered on. Let's say you came in as an F1 student. They're going to ask if you actually went to the school, how long you went to the school. They want to know what your intent was. If you came in on a visitor's visa, they're going to ask you, well, what did you intend to do when you came here? Well, I was just here on vacation because I wanted to go see A, B, or C. Or I came to visit my sister who was expecting a child. Or I came for a business meeting. So they've gone there. That has not changed at all. They want to know when you first entered, what was your intent? Did you intend to? And the absolute worst answer for that was, I decided to come over here because my boyfriend and I decided to get married over here. Never say that you came here because you intended to get married. Okay, because you got a visitor's visa. That means you were supposed to be visiting. People who intend to marry here don't plan on visiting, they plan on staying. So you definitely don't want to say that the two of you had discussed it and decided it was better to get married over here than it was for the U.S. citizen to fly to your country and get married there. Don't say that. That's fraud at the time of entry. It just is. Another question that they're asking is, well, when you realized that you overstayed your visa, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you leave right then? Because, look, if you overstay your F1 or whatever, you overstay your visitor's visa, let's stick with that. As long as you haven't overstayed up to 6 months, you don't have the big problem of needing a waiver to get back in. So they're going to ask you that. Well, you realize that you overstayed your visa. Why didn't you just go home once you realized it? This also happens with children. You know, sometimes the kids are brought in by their parents and they come in and they're, 15 years old. The family's coming to Disney World or something. And then the family, unbeknownst to the child, the family decides that they're going to stay here. They've got family in Miami and they're going to go and just remain in the United States. Well, at 15, you don't have a whole lot to say about that. But the day you turn 18, they're going to want to know, well, you're now an adult. Why didn't you leave as soon as you could? Once you realized that you were here illegally and you were informed by your parents that, oh yeah, well, you entered with a visa, but, we were supposed to leave a while ago. Once you found that out and you're 18 years of age, they're going to want to know why you didn't leave instead. So you better have your answers lined up for that. Maybe you were in school, maybe you were dating somebody, maybe some family member was sick, whatever. You better have an answer prepared for that, and it better be a truthful, honest answer. Well, kind of connected to what I was just talking about, who brought you to the United States? Meaning, was it your parents? Maybe it was an uncle or an aunt because your parents were back home. What was their legal status? What is their status now? This is the type of question that could make some people uncomfortable, especially if it's an aunt or an uncle or a friend of the family. They're going to want to know names. They're going to want to know names, and that's going to make you uncomfortable because you don't know what immigration is going to do with that information, especially if they're not U.S. citizens. They might be permanent residents, and I think you have a right to be concerned about that because they are rescinding permanent residents. You're not allowed to harbor illegal aliens, which I know I'm supposed to call them undocumented, but whatever. You're not allowed to harbor people who are here illegally. You're not allowed to help people enter illegally. I think there's an exception for immediate family members, which would mean spouse, mother, father, minor, child. But don't hold me to that. I seem to recall that there's an exception to that rule. But you have to be aware of the fact that this is something that they could very well be asking you. Talk to your own attorney about this. You should have an attorney go with you to this interview. I see it all the time on social media that people say, you don't need an attorney, you don't need an attorney. Yeah, you don't need an attorney until you need an attorney. And by then it's too late, right? When I went to these cases, I sat behind the couple and I sat there taking notes. Every question that was asked, the first note I wrote down was the name of the person who was doing the interview. None of my clients ever even thought about that. I wrote down every single question that was answered and every answer that was given, so that later, if you get a notice of intent to deny, the attorney can say, when it says, you were asked question XYZ and you responded da 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 da, the attorney can look down at their notes and say, that's not what they said at all, and dispute it. It's going to be a he said, she said, but I think it's very important. You know, I know you guys are trying to save money, I get it, but you need to have an attorney with you. You really should. It will at least relieve some of the anxiety. Other questions that were asked, this is for somebody who entered on a visitor's visa. Did you do any tourist activities after entering on B2? I mean, you're coming in as a tourist. What kind of tourist activities did you do? Where did you go? What did you see? It's not the best time to think of an answer for that while you're sitting at the interview, because guaranteed you're going to forget that, oh yeah, you did this, and something else. You're going to remember one thing, and they're going to say, well, that should have taken 6 months, or that shouldn't have taken 90 days. Make sure that you try to remember every single thing that you did once you entered that was in accordance with your whatever visa you came in on. Have it be a student visa, have it be a visitor's visa, it could be an H. There's any number of visas it could be. Another question they could ask you is, where did you go once you entered the United States? And they want to know where you went. Now, if you're in the Philadelphia area and you have friends if you're in the Philadelphia area and you have friends or family here, your destination is Philadelphia, maybe you want to check out a college. That might be another reason why you came here. But if your whole destination was Philadelphia, normally you would fly into the Philadelphia International Airport. But there's a lot of people that will fly into Newark, New Jersey, because it's a little bit cheaper, or they'll fly into JFK. up in New York. Well, if you tell immigration that your whole intention was to visit your aunt and uncle and cousins in Philadelphia, but you flew into New York City, the obvious question is going to be, well, why did you fly into New York? Why didn't you just fly straight into Philadelphia? The truthful answer could very well be, well, my boyfriend's up in New York. You know, I met him in India when he was studying over there for 6 months, and I wanted to go see my boyfriend. You better have an explanation better than I wanted to see my boyfriend. You could certainly, I wouldn't lie about it, but you could certainly say I had a friend who was in New York, and I figured I'd stop and see that person and then go down and see my family. And then just kind of move along and say, you know, then we went to see Amish country, we went to see historical Philadelphia, we went to see a show in Atlantic City, you know, we went to see Washington, D.C., blah, 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 blah. You could show, you know, and try to get past all that, what the heck were you doing up in New York? But if they say, a friend, what kind of a friend? What's your friend's name? You have to be honest. You have to be honest. And another thing to keep in mind is that you were not engaged at the time you entered the United States. Maybe this was a guy that you met. He was a U.S. citizen studying studying in India or your foreign country. You met him. You were just good friends at this point. You liked each other, but you weren't engaged. You had no intention of getting married. Because if it was your intention to marry here, you've got yourself a problem. I'm not sure how you're going to get around that. There is a waiver, but it wouldn't look good for you. And some of the reasons you might want to give for, if they're appropriate, if they're accurate, some of the reasons you might want to give for why you don't want a consular process, as I mentioned, could be that you wouldn't be able to get back in without a waiver. But it could also be that you might be taking care of someone here. Maybe you might be taking care of someone here. You might have some medical issues that might prevent you from flying too often. The financial hardship alone. You know, it's one thing if you're in Miami and you're originally from Nicaragua, it's not going to be that expensive to fly back to Nicaragua. But if you're in, you know, Kansas City and you're originally from India or Australia or wherever, and it costs a lot of money to go back and forth on these trips, that's a valid reason. It's certainly one of the reasons. And before I end this, because they're all the new questions that they seem to be asking, right? I want to go back over the questions that they usually ask, that they're perfectly allowed to ask. They've been asking these for years, just so that you have an idea of what to expect. Like I said, the first one is almost always, how did you two meet? The next question is, well, tell me a little bit about the relationship. You know, when did it start to get serious? How long were you two dating? How long were you two dating when someone proposed? Who proposed? I've had officers ask about a ring. Did he give you an engagement ring when he proposed? And the adjudicator, if this happened to be a woman, she seemed to be a little put out that he never gave her an engagement ring. Guess what? That's not required. You don't have to have an engagement ring. But it is, oh, that's another question they ask, speaking of rings. They ask who bought the wedding rings. Because you'd be surprised how many immigrant females buy the wedding rings. Because I kind of think that that's sort of the guy's job, isn't it? He should be paying for the wedding bands. He certainly should be paying for the engagement ring. But like I said, you don't have to have an engagement ring. If he didn't give you an engagement ring, don't say that he did, because you're thinking, oh shit, he was supposed to give me a ring and he never did. Because if they separate you and you say, yeah, he gave me a ring, I stopped wearing it once I got married because I have the wedding band, and you make some cockamamie story up, you've got yourself a problem. Because if they've separated you, they're going to ask him the same darn question. And he, having been drilled, having had it drilled into his head, you have to be honest, he's going to say, I never gave her a ring. I never gave her a ring. That's a big discrepancy. I once had a client where they were living in Philadelphia, supposedly, and they decided to get married in New York, which is weird. Just that alone is strange. And the question was, well, how did you go from Philadelphia to New York? They took the immigrant first, and you should have heard him. He went on this big long song and dance about how a friend of his came and picked him up, and it was his friend was driving, there was another friend in the car, and then they went over to pick her up. They went to her house, and then everybody drove up to New York. And I mean, his explanation must have taken 15 minutes, which is suspect right there. And then they pull her in and they ask her the same question, and she says, I went up separately. Big problem. Big problem. He ended up getting put in deport, by the way. I think eventually he got legal, but not through her. Anyway, big long song and dance, but they do ask about the relationship. How long were you dating? When did it start to get serious? When did you start talking about getting married? Who proposed to whom? Was there an engagement ring? Who paid for the wedding bands? Who attended the wedding? They sometimes talk about the financial questions, like who pays the bills. It's not unusual to have one person pay the rent and the other person pays all the utilities, the phone and the electric and the cable and whatever. So who pays what? You should have a joint bank account, by the way. You should have a joint bank account. And those checks, well, nobody writes checks anymore, but those things should be coming out of that joint bank account. Both people should be putting money into it, and both people should be authorizing the use of however your Zelle or however you pay online for these things. That money should be coming in, going out, and being used by both parties. Oh, I know another question they used to always ask that would get my goat. Whatever, if it was like a holiday like Christmas, let's say your interview's in January, and they're going to ask you, what did he give you for Christmas? If it's not near Christmas, maybe it's near your birthday, right? Well, what did he give you for your birthday? Or what did you give him for his birthday? The anniversary. Maybe the anniversary is right around then. You need to be sure about your answers to those questions, because I think they're horrible questions, because especially like at Christmas time or something, you might give that person 3 or 4 different gifts. And you remember the one gift that was really hard for you to get, and it meant a lot to you to be able to get it, to give it to her. But she's not thinking about that gift. She's thinking about the most expensive gift you gave her. So they say, you said you gave her A, but she says you gave her B. Same thing with, what was the last movie you guys saw together? Oh my God. Again, one party is thinking, the last time we went to the movies, we saw blank. The other person is thinking, well, we watched a movie last night at the house. And so obviously the problem is one is saying, oh, it was movie A, and the other one is saying movie B. They're both right, but the problem is that the question was poorly asked. Do the best that you can to prepare for these interviews. I think these extra questions might help you a little bit. And if If you really can't afford an attorney to go with you, which I think you can't afford not to have an attorney, especially under this administration, at least go for a consultation with somebody. Get a consultation and see if they can help relieve some of your anxiety and your stress, to ask about what you can expect at an interview. Because that's another thing. Every district court, no, strike there. Every office, immigration office, is a little bit different. Each adjudicator is a little bit different. So an attorney local to you is going to know their field office. Is it a good field office, or is it a real pain in the ass field office? So if I were you, I would at least have a consultation. I wish you the very best. If your interview is coming up, please take some time to really think through these subjects. All these, think about your relationships, think about your living situation. So anyway, please practice some of these questions. Think about this, take this seriously. Have a consultation with an immigration attorney at the very least. If you find this helpful, please hit subscribe. I have, what is today? Today is June 9th. I have 139 subscribers. I'm trying to get to 150. Actually, I'm trying to get to 500. But let's get to 150 first. And so hit subscribe, hit like, leave a comment. If you've actually had your interview, was there a question that was asked that you were surprised by? I would love to hear that. And thank you very much for spending some time with me. I hope you like this, and I'll see you in another video. Good luck with your interview. You're going to do great.